we're going to start by, the talk tonight, but it's really also a dialogue, is about the future of the feminine. And the reason why I invited Schuyler, and the reason we connected, is that we've both done work over many years about this process of integration. And it's very, very relevant, particularly right now. So we're going to begin by Schuyler giving us a little ceremony that will actually place us in this place and in this particular vein.
Yes.
So Schuyler.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. Before I start the ceremony, Tad's word, not mine. It's not going to be very elaborate, this ceremony, but I just want to recognize how special this place is, that we're in the Rubin Museum. I've visited here many, many times over many years in New York City, and to be here on the stage is sort of surreal and very humbling experience. And also, I'd like to recognize that there are many people in the audience tonight who are teachers, friends, collaborators, sisters, and people who are doing this work. Allies alongside me, with me, inspiring me. And so to all of you sitting out there, I want to recognize all the work that you're doing, and I'm sure there are many more of you that I don't yet know, and I'd love to know what you're working on. And probably if you had an interest in this topic, there is some part of your work that applies, and just like basic principle number one of the feminine, it's a collaborative experience, and it's really, there's a whole community already sitting here in this audience. So I love you. Thank you for being here. It's so touching.
Thank you.
All right. So I asked Tad if I could do this, just a very brief sort of presencing exercise. And we'll talk about this, sort of the work that I do in the world. And this is the kind of thing that I would do. I do a lot of facilitation of groups. And so this is the kind of thing that I might do in a group facilitation process. And it's just a really great idea anytime we're gathering, especially when we're gathering to explore the feminine, which is an embodied experience. And I notice right now, I'm nervous. So I'm really in my head is really buzzing. I can't feel my lower body right now at all. My heart is racing. I'm having a physical experience of this moment. We don't often acknowledge that.
We like that, by the way.
A physical experience?
No, what you're saying.
Oh, good. Okay. Good. I have no problem if you don't either.
No,
Vulnerability is my middle name. Yeah. But so if you would join me in this presencing exercise. This is for my benefit as well as yours, and I think it will really bring us here together in this moment. So you can close your eyes if you feel comfortable to do that. Definitely make yourself comfortable in your seat. An upright position is good. Feet flat on the ground is also good. We're just breathing and coming into the space. You may hear some sounds, something like waves. This is just an aural aid. We can sort of orient ourselves by these sounds. So let's just arrive here in this space, and we'll start by arriving, each of us individually, in our body, our home. if you just notice what's happening in your body in this moment, without needing to change anything, it's just an act of noticing and awareness. Maybe checking in and feeling where there may be tension related to things that have happened to you over the course of the day, or generally related to this time in your life. Just feeling rooted, seated in this space, in this moment, in this body. And recognizing that now, being present in this moment is such a gift. And in this present moment, we include the past and we include the future. Maybe noticing also the emotional body, the state of your emotions in this moment. Again, not needing to change anything, but just bringing an awareness to the flavor of this moment for you. Kind of a loving attention we can bring to this practice. And also checking in with the mental body or the thoughts. Maybe noticing how open or closed your mind is in this moment. And also recognizing the connection between that mind that lives in your head and the mind that lives in your heart. And now that we've become aware of these aspects of our being in this body, let's just notice space itself and the permeability of our bodies. Maybe feeling an expansiveness and beginning to become aware of us. Beyond your body, there are other bodies in this space, each having an experience. And this event tonight will be what we create. The quality of our attention, our presence, each of us, our state of being, everything we bring into this room together, we share. Maybe recognizing for a moment what a magical, unique moment this is because we're here together. And then finally, checking in before we talk about this topic with the feeling in your body of the masculine, or what you would consider the masculine. Maybe the directed, clear, compassionate actor, skillful means. Where in your body does this masculine aspect live? Maybe you can locate it somewhere in particular, or maybe it really spreads throughout some part of your body. Maybe you don't sense it in that way, that's okay. We're just exploring. just enjoy getting to know and experience this masculine in you. And see if it can take shape. Just noticing what it's like. And now we shift and take a moment to locate and observe what we would consider the feminine within. Notice how they're different or similar. What happens in you when you locate the feminine? And likewise, does it live somewhere in particular in the body? If you had to locate it, where would you say it lives? And then noticing the interplay between them with curiosity, no judgment. Do they seem to be dancing? Do they fight? Are they estranged? Maybe they've never met. Just before we come back into the space, maybe giving yourself a little gratitude, like an hug, an internal hug, some warmth. And thanking that part of you that is the witness, the observer, that allowed you to do this exercise with me. All right, and then just coming back into the space, opening your eyes. And if we could just look around the room. We're all facing forward right now, but maybe just look to your right and to your left. Acknowledge that person. You can just smile or... And maybe even look behind you. Look at us.
Or look inside yourself, for that matter.
Thank you.
So I would like to start by asking Schuyler, as a futurist, first of all, exactly what is a futurist? And I'm also interested in how she works, what kind of techniques or devices that she uses, but also even the kind of clients that she attracts. And there are lots of very different kinds of answers to those questions, I'm sure. So please.
Okay.
We need the first
slide. Okay. Well, let's see, where are we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you were visiting, everybody recognized this is the wall upstairs, right? So when I was here, I actually attended a few of the talks that Tad gave and got so much out of each of them. But last time I was here, I took a photograph of this wall because I love that wall. And I was just noticing that so many of these statements, for me, have to do with a lack of the feminine in the culture. So I don't know if you can read them, but like, I don't look after myself and I don't sleep. That's something I notice a lot, you know, a lack of attention to the body, especially in some of the worlds I work in, like the corporate world. I mean, people will go like 3-4 hour meetings without a snack, without peeing. Did anybody know this experience? It's like people do not even go to the bathroom because the work we're doing is so urgent, right? But I think there's an overriding of the body that as part of my work. And a lot of what I'm doing these days, and I'll kind of like, I'll back up a little bit, but attention to these subtle dimensions of what we accept as normal, right, in our cultures right now, is really, for me, where we can begin to integrate more of the feminine. But I don't sleep, I don't take care of myself. I doubt I will ever feel loved enough to be able to love myself. People accept fear to guide their lives, and also I do. And then this beautiful it's tragic drawing of the earth, I think probably all of us can relate to. The earth is in trouble. And anxiety, in my world, I've been experiencing a lot of anxiety myself in these times. And a lot of the women in my life, I'm lucky to be a part of many groups of women, and they're often text messages exchanged, lots of phone calls. There's a lot of communicating about how anxious we are in these times. And I think tonight we really want to talk about where some of that anxiety is coming from, but I just wanted to...
And also where it's going.
And where it's going, yeah, and what we can do with it. But then the flip side of that also, to me, felt really related to the feminine and the integration of the feminine and masculine, as someone else did this beautiful drawing, that sums it up there with the yin-yang. I am connected to someone I adore. So the feminine being the relational energy. So the space between us, and like a friend of mine, Nilima Bhatt, says, the great gift of the feminine is belonging. So I'm looking for that all the time in the cultures that I work in, and it's is there a sense of belonging here? And part of the exercise we just did is that, we create a little community everywhere we go, or at least there's the possibility of that. So belonging, nature, children, I think these are all the things that give us hope. And these are timeless things, right? This has nothing to do with the internet. There were a couple of I didn't read on the last slide about our leadership, but that's also timeless, nothing new.
And it's also a little bit relevant.
Right. So what does a futurist do? Well, many people would answer that differently. I can tell you that I started my career in 1995 in San Francisco as a trend spotter. That's what we were called before we became futurists. And really that's what we were doing. We were spotting trends. And I was among the first official trend spotters, a person who was paid to do this, on behalf of big corporations mostly. So 1995, there was a fin de siècle, my favorite art history term,
right, sure.
Along with chiaroscuro.
Right.
But there was an energy at that time. People were really, really looking toward the future, probably for astrological reasons that you understand that
Sure.
I don't, but also because it was going to be the turn of the millennium, if you remember that Y2K madness. But at that time, I was in my early 20s and had a gift for understanding where things were headed next, basically. And that manifested very early as an interest in tarot and palmistry, and I was always playing in dreams. I was always playing with these sort of mystical modalities. I never dreamed I could parlay it into a career, which I did. And I worked for big advertising agencies and many very big brands. And my job was to go out and infiltrate subcultures, basically, and bring back...
which is where you lived most of the time.
Which is
probably.
where I was living anyway. It was very easy. Actually, I'm a bridge. I was sort of living between. I could really bridge between the edge and the mainstream, which has always sort of been my gift. I can go to the edge and bring back the information in ways that the mainstream can digest. And I did this for many years, and I was really successful at it. And then around 2006, it started before that. About 2003, I began my spiritual life. My spiritual interest really began to kick in, and I was having a very hard time. I was living parallel lives, basically. So I was in advertising at that time and working with these big brands. And I was beginning to see that the work, I was using my gifts in ways I didn't feel good about, really, to sell things. And I was becoming aware that of the climate crisis. I just saw what I was contributing to in terms of our consumerist society, and I quit my job. So where does that leave us? In the woods.
Past, present, future.
Okay.
That's where it leaves us.
Well, I guess what I'd like to say about this is, when I started doing trends and when I was working as a futurist early on, there was very much a linear conception of time that we still mostly carry, especially in the business world. That the past is what happened yesterday, and the future is what happens tomorrow, right? This is not the case. That is an illusion. If you haven't been to the 6th floor to the Padmasambhava exhibit, I highly recommend it, because it feels like this issue of time is kind of like the flat world, round planet moment of our age. And so I began to get very interested in what the future is, actually, and how it happens. And these days, and basically since I quit my job, so around 2008, I realized that I no longer wanted to predict or distill the future for brands, but I wanted to help create a future that was sustainable. That I wanted to make sure we would have a future, basically, on this planet. So from that moment forward, everything I did was about helping companies, and then suddenly it was also political movements, climate-related movements and communications, and just like sort of starting to plant the seeds for a future that we can actually live into. So I'm not really going to follow the slides too much. I did want to mention, let's see, I'm confused because this is different than that. Yeah. There it is. Yeah, the present moment contains both the past and the future. The time of the great turning, the work of Joanna Macy has been very influential for me, but this phrase, the time of the great turning, it's the knife's edge of uncertainty where we come into our truest power. This is really, I've been using this a lot in my work. She says it's a time when we're going to need to hospice what needs to be hospiced, and midwife what needs to be born. And I see a lot of nodding heads. That feels so true, doesn't it? Yeah. There are things that need to be put to rest about the way we're living, and there are things that need to be born. So, what do we got here? Yeah. So the rise of the feminine. As Tad mentioned, this is something I've been exploring for many years, and it all feels like it's really, I wouldn't say coming to a head, because I think we've got many, many years. It
has a lot of heads. And a lot of hearts as well, hopefully.
Good. But yeah, I mean, this was a picture I took at the march, and I spend a lot of time now thinking about and making sense of what's happening right now, especially with regards to the rise of the feminine and what it means in the context of our work in the world. So I'm going to stop there. The one other question you asked that I thought it would be good to answer is, who am I working for these days? Still a few corporate clients, but the work that I do with them is very different. It's a lot of culture change and teaching emotional intelligence, empathy, and other relational skills that it feels like we really need in our work environments, and bringing that feminine dimension. And then also I work a lot as a pattern disruptor. That's not an official title. But what happens is I find myself in these boardrooms and in these meetings representing a different speed or way of being, and I'm frequently just putting the brakes on the dysfunctional, sort of toxic culture that exists in many of our corporations. And then, do you want me to talk about these? What do you think we should do?
It's interesting because Schuyler's been interested in many of the things I've been interested in the sense that I wrote a book that was published in 1995 called Sacred Sexuality, and the idea of the book was to look at history and to see when there were cultures in the past where male and female coming together was something worshipped and something desirable and something that was integral to the way the world ran. And what I mean by that is that there was a kind of acceptance of sexuality instead of presenting it as something strange or aberrant, but rather the connection of male and female was something that was central to the workings of the whole society. And this is true of Assyria and Egypt. And in fact, if you even go back to the cave paintings at Lascaux, they were really celebrating the feminine. In the first talk I gave, in this series 7 weeks ago, I was talking about some of my ideas about reincarnation, and the time of the Lascaux cave paintings was a celebration of the feminine, because instead of humanity being nomadic, actually, they discovered agriculture and domesticating animals, and these were all seen as being feminine functions. And so the type of worship went from being celestial beings that would follow you if you were nomadic to the earth. And so the idea of Gaia, connecting to the earth, which is the underlying dynamic of the little meditation that Schuyler read earlier, is very, very important. And there are a lot of symbols of that we all know about and are very alive for us, including women like this, who basically, we were talking about this today, that it looks as though, because this was found as a clay figure, but it looks like it's emerging from the earth. And that's actually a very good representation of the feminine, particularly in those cultures where, and one of the main points that's relevant to this is that Gaia is the earth who has always been perceived as being feminine. And so when in any society the feminine isn't valued, then it means that the earth isn't being valued. And guess what we're seeing right now? We're seeing the consequences of hundreds, if not thousands of years where the masculine has basically treated the earth as though it is raw material instead of something sacred. Many of my books have been about sacred landscapes and the sacred language of trees, but a lot of those symbols are something that in a way we need to kind of rediscover or to at least understand. And Schuyler is definitely moving in that direction.
Well, I would love to say just a little something about this figure. This figure is in the Brooklyn Museum, and I live across the street from the Brooklyn Museum, and so I visit this figure nearly weekly, actually, like all the time. And, this is my experience of the feminine, is that these objects and these symbols will speak to us.
Absolutely.
And it's been a really humbling and profound experience that I also, just going back on, I also visited the caves in France a couple years ago. And I'm a pilgrimage maker. I frequently make pilgrimages to places and to see these objects and to spend time with these objects because there's a transmission that happens that isn't. I also read plenty of books, but being in these caves, I went to see if I could gain some insight into the feminine, and I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot. It's interesting because a number of the speakers that have been here before, particularly the Tibetan Buddhist Lama a few weeks ago, and Maestro Manuel, who was a shaman, that a lot of information that gets transmitted that's really valuable for us to pick up on is not something that's in your head. It's not about reading about things or about understanding information, but rather about taking things to heart. In Tibetan Buddhism, they call it a transmission, meaning learning something is only the first step. And whereas a transmission, you can see it in the Padmasambhava exhibit on the top floor of the Rubin, that these elements of wisdom from the past are coming back to revisit us. And I think, it was clear to me in the beginning that a lot of Schuyler's work is about finding relevant imagery in the past and beginning to bring it back into play. With people, particularly in a patriarchal culture, they don't want to know about it particularly, but they discover that it actually is transformative when they do. So
well, can I also say, a big part of my work for a very long time has been trying to be a different way. How do I say this? I feel very, I guess what's coming to mind are the metrics and the data, that this obsession with proof that we have in the culture now, and everything that you're saying, I don't know what we do with that exactly. I find myself all the time in meetings or in situations with people in the world where I'm trying to convey something and they need me to prove it with data. Anybody else? I'm so data allergic these days, and I feel like the obsession with metrics is really fear-based, mostly, and we've talked a lot about the oracles at Delphi.
Right.
And Sarah Drew here in the front row wrote a beautiful book called The Gaia Codex, and there's a scene in that book that I really resonated with about the character going to meet with the oracle at Delphi. And there was some part of me, and I think many women, that still remembers what that experience of meeting. You keep changing it here, but it's not changing for them.
Well, I know it's not, but yeah.
Okay.
You're the vehicle of that.
Oh, I'm the vehicle of this. Okay. Yeah. And so what Tad is showing me is a quote from Joseph Campbell, which says, woman magic and earth magic are one and the same. Woman magic and earth magic are one and the same. But, I was always inspired by the oracles at Delphi because there was an ecstatic and theatrical aspect to what they were doing. And I sort of take that to heart, especially when I'm working in a corporate setting. On some level, I need to convince people of things and I need to prove things with numbers, although I'm really a rebel about that. More often, what I'm doing is channeling that oracle and moving people into a state where they don't need the proof because they feel it in their bodies. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I needed to say.
Yeah, an interesting theme because Schuyler and I are beginning to work on a book together called The Serpent's Dream, which is in a way about symbols of the divine feminine and women's power. And among those symbols are snakes and serpents and bulls and crescent moons. And a lot of these symbols that are we all carry because of our genetic code. I mean, whether we know about them in an academic way or not, that we feel these things. There's a very deep resonance inside, and that when you look back into the past, you discover that these symbols were very powerful and they presented the feminine as a force that was really dominant and really extremely powerful. And we both believe that this is something that needs to come back into play, meaning that what's happened really in many ways is that the patriarch has kind of stolen the symbols. Like the snake, like the medical profession, the last thing in their minds is dealing with Kundalini energy, which is what the snakes encircling a pole actually represent. And so a lot of these symbols, or Subaru saying that, love is a Subaru, what? So in a way, this is also an exploration, and from what I know of Schuyler's work, it's also a major part of what she's doing. And it may not be literally that case, but it's about bringing these symbols that symbolize aliveness and the feminine and this idea of connectedness and holism and a respect of the earth. And these are all very powerful symbols.
Mm-hmm. Can you move forward with this?
Where are we? Oh.
Yeah, some of the symbols.
We're, of course, editing our proposal as we do this, which is...
We'll go back to that. Yeah?
Why don't you tell them about this tree?
Yeah. These are, you recognize probably the banyan tree, and over here a Kapok tree, which is the Mayan tree of life. These trees, I was in Key West recently, and I took these photos. And the Kapok tree, especially this one over here, it's hard to tell scale, but anybody know these trees? They are absolutely magical. They're incredible. And these buttress roots, that's about 6 feet tall, the buttress root. And so this tree is pretty famous in Key West, and it has a sign, and it's kind of on a main drag. And people take pictures in front of it all the time because it's like you can stand in front of it, and it's just an extraordinary being. And so around the back side of the tree, there was a buttress root that just curved like this around itself. And I could actually sit in the root and not be seen at all. And so every morning I would go sit, I felt like an elf or something, but I would go sit in the back side of this tree in the root. And I just really wanted to commune with the tree. And I spent a lot of time with it. And the last day I was there, I had a really beautiful experience in a deep state of meditation where a phrase came to me. It was chthonic ways of being. And this was one of these strange moments where I didn't know what that meant. And I almost sort of overrode it. I thought, well, I wasn't really thinking, but I kind of continued with my meditation, and other things were revealed to me, so I was having quite an experience. And I saw the tree as a ladder, and I really was feeling the root system and then this kind of golden ladder to above. And as I came out of the meditation, I sort of stood up. I was climbing out of my curled buttress root. And it was very early in the morning, and all of a sudden a woman poked her head around the corner and said, "Could you take our picture?" And I was like, so out of it. And I looked at her, and I was slightly annoyed at first. And I said, "I'm going to need a moment. Just, could you give me a moment?" And she nodded and then sort of popped back around the other side of the tree. I was like, oh my God. And so then she kind of walked around again, and I think she felt badly, and she had a man with her, and she said, "We just got married." And so there we were. I came out of the tree in this state and took their photo in front of the tree. And it was really such a beautiful moment. I felt like I was sort of somehow giving them a blessing from the tree. Long story short, in the end, the message, so I was walking away and I remembered chthonic ways of being. And it opened up a whole doorway for me. The chthonic state is the underworld. And it's these beings and deities many traditions have, these spirits that live in the earth. And it's the dark feminine, it is the unconscious mind, it is so much. I just spent the next 4 or 5 days, and I'm still in it, like in this deep research in this space of reverie for, I don't know, this whole world of beings that I don't feel like we pay much attention to at all. And so I'm really in my life, like I'm really at a point right now where I'm very interested in these chthonic ways of being and what might happen if we invite them back.
In fact, she spoke to me that day and was saying that she really felt like in a deep communication with the tree. And I wrote a book 8 or 10 years ago called The Sacred Language of Trees, which is basically that in almost every culture, including Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever, Taoism, that the original creators are almost always goddesses, and they were tree goddesses.
Oh, yeah.
Because tree goddesses connected heaven and earth together, and they also basically, a god is one thing, but it needs a woman to bring something into being. Men can twiddle around all they want, but it's not going to really lead to something tangible unless there's something to receive that energy. So Schuyler and I, in the time we've known each other, discover that almost every quirky thing that either of us have ever discovered, the other one, of course, already knows about. So these are yakshis that are, Buddhist goddesses that are essentially tree goddesses. In the same way that the Buddha is often depicted as achieving enlightenment under a Bodhi tree. You could say that those are feminine symbols, meaning the Buddha is quite profound because he's actually saying in the symbolism that it requires that connection to the earth and to the tree to be able to have that peace and connectedness in order to achieve enlightenment. So a lot of these things are very integral, and it's Schuyler's doing something wonderful by really transmitting these things to people in sometimes coded ways. But
yeah, always, almost always. I never talk like this when I'm working, by the way. I don't tell tree stories, generally.
But we're also both very much interested in mandalas, as a way of centering. And these are some of Schuyler's mandalas. I'll let her talk about them. And
yeah, I think the funny thing is like, have had over the years, I've had to carve out space for my own exploration of something like the feminine because there's no space for it. Increasingly there's more, thankfully, but it's like when I had a job in the corporate world or when I was, working as hard as we do, you don't get to go sit in trees as much as you'd like to. But I started making these mandalas. This one's I made just right outside the Brooklyn Public Library one day. I was telling Tad, it's like, it looks like it could be like in a fairy glen in Ireland or something. It's like very Celtic. But it was just this like really rough, kind of nasty patch of earth outside the library. But that's what I love doing these, especially in New York City, because I just pick up whatever's on the ground, really, and work with it. This one I made in Central Park. This one upstate. And this one in Prospect Park. And there was a time when I was doing this kind of every day, and I was reminded of the story of Jung, one of my heroes, and yours too. And just who doesn't love Jung? Maybe some people don't like. But when Jung there's a famous story about him when he came to a point in his own personal development where he was stuck.
right.
And he remembered as a child how he loved to play by the banks of this river near his house. And he made these little mud huts and played with stones and sticks and made villages. And he really espoused play and going back to those things you love to do as a child. And so this for me was that type of exercise. I started it during Navaratri. Navaratri is the 9 days of the goddess. It's a Hindu festival. And I've studied Vedanta for a long time. And so I was observing Navaratri, and the first day I made one of these. I just wanted to connect with nature, and so I went into Prospect Park and started playing with whatever I found. And then I just did it every day during those 9 days, and then continued for the last couple of years, really. So I have hundreds of these. I mean, I don't have them. I have pictures of them because they disappear. But it has given me such a, like, I really know what's in season. I know the plants in New York City so much better. It's kind of like gardening in that way.
Yeah, it's a combination of gardening, but also mandalas are a kind of, as you know from Tibetan
Healing.
Buddhism, are a kind of spiritual protection. It's like they create our territory. They define the way we see the world, and we're making something that if someone else comes across it, they're going to recognize it and identify it in all kinds of ways. It's something, again, we've both done for years and years or decades in our lives, and me a few more decades, but otherwise the dynamic of it is really powerful, and it's something that we, of course, it's something that we do. I mean, this is a calendar of mine that actually was done in 1976, but it was a lunar calendar. So I kept thinking that instead of the solar calendar, which doesn't connect to anything, I mean, our solar calendar has had to been corrected many, many times over the last few thousands of years, the Julian calendar from Julius Caesar. But I decided at one point, I was moving to London, and this is a calendar that is really based on lunar cycles. And it's fascinating because you realize that certain religions like Judaism and Islam have completely lunar calendars to this day. I mean, you can see on the outermost rings that the new moons, which are the black ones on that kind of first ring out, represent the new moon, and the Chinese and Indian and Hebrew and Jewish calendars all change months on the new moons, very much like the ancient Celts did, the way many ancient cultures did, and our solar calendar is completely off base. So again, this is another expression of that connection between male and female, which is that we become more and more disconnected and disoriented from nature. So it's a very important, and I think all of these little steps help us create this integration of the male and the female.
Yeah. Yeah. This is what comes next. So this was a quote. This was a conversation that I witnessed. So a big part of my job is listening. So I'm doing right now, well, I'll be doing a listening tour of rural America starting in October in North Carolina. And we're going to go to 6 small towns. This is a project that I'm doing for the Ford Foundation and a group called People's Action. It's really extraordinary that it came my way, actually, because it's kind of like I'm out with my feminine with them, and they like it. So we're doing the groups with all women in these towns. My co-facilitator is a wonderful woman, Juanita Roberson, and the idea is really to hold space in these towns. It's not to force a position or to gather information, any particular information on issues. This is very unusual for a political group to go out and do this kind of research. Actually, it's pretty radical. And so this was a conversation I witnessed between a bunch of boomers who were talking about politics and getting more and more, just like really worked up about the political situation and angry. There was just so much emotion in the conversation, but all of it was happening up here, just like back and forth in their heads. And finally, one woman said this, and she said it, and the room stopped. Because there was such a deep recognition that was the existential fear that was present for everybody. And I just, it's so powerful for me because we are, really. But, and this is why it's important to learn, to know about the past and to know the feminine, because the feminine is chaos. And we feel uncomfortable with chaos because we've exercised her, from our knowledge, and from our structures.
And chaos creates life. I mean, chaos theory is all about the fact that nature is by definition chaotic, and that from chaos emerges particularly creative types of order. And of course, the patriarchy believes that order is their domain. So they want to really, like modern science in a way, but look where it's taken us. It's taken us to a place where we're destroying the planet. And, it really is very significant that these ideas are all of these ideas that seem subversive, that are connected to the feminine, are things that really do need to be brought into synchronicity and into connection to this force that's actually not really working in our favor. I mean, you can see this going on not just in America, but all over the world. And I really believe that there's a limit to things, and that I think we need to really think in that direction. So chaos is a wonderful thing, as long as you embrace it.
And we know how to handle it.
We
in
do.
Our bones. This is how I handle it.
This is a Schuyler Brown original,
This is a
by the
Schuyler
way.
Brown original. This was during the North Korea talks. And I really, back to that anxiety, at that time, we were really teetering on the brink. And I was doing a course online with William Ury, and he's the master negotiator from Harvard, and he was negotiating. He was in the middle of this North Korea conversation, and I had this class with him, so I was sort of getting this backstage view into what was happening, and he was saying it's really much worse than, we are really on the verge. And so I was waking up during that time, just feeling very anxious and getting text messages, as I mentioned, from friends who were also very anxious. And one morning, I didn't know what to do with my anxiety, and so I did what I do, which is to sit in it, and just sat in it. And I sat in this anxiety for hours, and I cried a lot. And I wasn't, it was clearing, but this question came to me, what force is there in the world that is greater than what is happening between these guys? And the Great Mother came, and this is inspired actually by the birth of Dal's twin grandchildren. And I just heard about these grandchildren being born, twins, and I was imagining the nursing of the twins, and suddenly I imagined the Great Mother nursing these man-children. And it felt, and I became her, and I just poured the love and the nourishment of the earth into these needy beings.
These needy little boys, basically.
And I'm not making any judgment call. I'm just saying this helped me to deal with the anxiety I was feeling. But I did actually, it kind of was a joke, and humor is really important.
Right. For example, I kept thinking probably the most positive outcome to that conference was to announce a Trump hotel in Pyongyang. But be that as it may.
Yes. Tell me.
Should we do these? Or
yeah.
Oops.
That's kind of it.
What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I'm curious where everybody is.
Let's go back just a touch. So talk about this maybe, if you want.
I did.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go ahead a bit because
I guess I will say something about, the work as I see it right now with bringing the feminine into the world, is...
this is her doing exactly that.
That's what I'm
by the
doing.
way.
But it is several things specifically. One is embodiment and being in the body. bringing the body back into our business dealings, back into politics. I work, as we now know, with corporate clients, with political clients, with people in academia, a lot of activists, and it's just like that is a full-time job in itself, just getting people to come back into their bodies. So it's like, okay, yeah, okay, what do you feel? What are we feeling right now? Okay, I got it. You know, and I don't know if anyone does trauma work or, you know, does this work of being with what is, and I'm sure you do, given where we are. It's a really challenging thing to do because it's countercultural, actually. Like, talk about radical and revolutionary, this is it. But try to ask a room full of activists not to do. But they're like, well, what do we do? What do we do? I'm like, what if we don't do anything? We just, what if we just were with our feelings? Just for a few minutes. It's just really intense, really, really intense work. But it leads to a whole different kind of doing. So the embodiment, the group work and collaborative work, I really believe that, you know, the problems that we're facing now are too complex for any individual, and that we're entering a new era of collective intelligence, that conscious facilitation of group dynamics is like one of the skills that we need now, and that we're going to be tapping into the future much, much more. You know, we're really going to get much better at surfacing the intelligence of the group. I do a lot of circle work. Like, this format is really awkward in a way. This, like, I'm talking at you, you're listening, you know, I'm up on a stage. You know, it's a totally different dynamic if we're sitting in circle and we're all holding the circle.
Yeah.
And then I guess what I wanted to say also about those was that fury and anger, I think, are also worth mentioning. That, you know, there's a proper place for them, and yeah, there's something happening, I think, around justice, which is also a feminine. I mean, we don't think of that so often as a feminine domain, but justice is the feminine. And, you know, I think a lot of the outrage about what's happening right now is a deep sense of that things are out of alignment with the natural order. And women hold that in their bodies. Like, we really feel that. And so the anger is really a perfectly appropriate and proper response to what's going on. I mean, the original Mother Night, her daughters were the Furies. So, and Nemesis was one of her daughters. Like, she had this whole host. My friend Mari, who's in the audience, gave me this amazing book that I'm referring to now. But, you know, just like, I think as women, we've sort of like become not so, we try to hide our anger. And I'm interested to explore what righteous and clean anger looks like at a time like this. Most of my anger is pretty enraged. It's like I call it a red rage. I haven't really mastered this yet, but I invite anyone who wants to explore righteous anger with me to let me know.
Maybe talk about this.
Yeah. Is it there?
Go.
Oh. Well, I mean, you mentioned sacred sexuality at the beginning of the conversation, and I mean, this is an image from a show that Tad put on. But, you know, back to this point about integration, when I asked you, you know, at the beginning and during that visualization or that meditation of a sort, how your masculine and feminine were in relation to each other, I'm curious, when we take questions or comments, I'd love to hear if anybody experienced anything particularly interesting there. I mean, I've just learned over the years that my masculine was really oppressive and domineering, especially after almost 20 years working in the corporate world. I had learned a lot of habits, and really my masculine side, which is on my right, like there's this gesture it does where it's going to the left side of my body, and there's not going to be integration or balance of the masculine and the feminine in the world until we find ways to balance them within ourselves. And I think like that right there is such a beautiful, inspiring exploration, because it's pretty crazy what you find when you go inside.
This image actually is one of the fundamental concepts of Tibetan Buddhism, is about compassion and wisdom. And compassion is associated with one gender and wisdom with the other. Fascinatingly and appropriately, wisdom is the phenomenon associated with the feminine, and compassion is the phenomenon associated with the masculine. And this is very contraindicated because a lot of men figure that they're very wise. But if you feel that the feminine is wise, then maybe Tibetan Buddhism is something quite attractive to study and to work with, which I've done for 40 years or more. But it was funny because I curated this show. I actually designed the exhibition at the Crow Collection in Dallas, which is one of the other two major Tibetan Buddhist museums in the country. And of course, because it's a foothold of fundamentalist Christians, that I actually took this photograph because before the show really went up, I went around and instead of showing the full body, which would have been, oh my goodness, look what they're showing, because they were all in something that Tibetan Buddhists called yabyeon, which is making love. So I photographed them in a slightly more intimate setting like this. But it is very interesting that, you know, these two mutual phenomena should really be perceived as being equal and a path to integration. So, you know, the book that we're working on together is called The Serpent's Dream, and it's in this image right here is a very fun, an amusing one in some ways. It's a famous painting by Uccello in the 14th century, and you see St. George is saving her from the dragon. But if you look, you'll see that she's holding the dragon's neck by a leash. Look at this, look. There's a leash from her hand around the dragon's neck. And she's coming from a cave, which is, of course, an overtly feminine symbol. And so my reading of this image is that during the 1370s, when this was painted, the Spanish Inquisition was in operation and accusing women of being witches if they had any healing powers, or because of sexuality, which the Roman Catholic Church was banning throughout Europe. So I think that what he was killing, because he's wearing silver armor very much like, you know, the Greek myth of Medusa and Perseus, to defend himself against sexual allure, and he was actually killing her split-off sexuality. So this is really the starting point of this book that we're working with and also playing with, you know, because it's quite necessary that we do both. This is another image, which is Michelangelo's image of the expulsion from Eden that happens to be in the Sistine Chapel. Well, look at the way that serpent with a woman's torso is wrapped around the tree of good and evil in the Garden of Eden and is giving an apple to Eve, who passes it on to Adam. And this is the reason why Adam and Eve were expelled from Eden. But it also happens to represent, that apple represents consciousness. So Eve and the serpent gave consciousness to humanity. So a lot of these symbols are very misleading because they've essentially, this is another of the same images in Paris at Notre Dame, you know, which is a church dedicated to the Virgin. So we're just trying to basically work with the symbolism and see that, like the snake that's on the pharaoh's crown, showing that the pharaohs were actually matrilineal and matrilineal. It was passed down from the feminine side of the family. So anyway, so we just wanted to show you some of these images, and this is one of Schuyler's favorites right here.
Yeah, it's from Lama Tsultrim's work. She just wrote a book called Wisdom Rising, and this is just the 5 dakinis. The dakinis are very close to my heart. Yeah.
So anyway, to conclude our presentation, we really feel that this Michelangelo image, of the man in the circle, and this is an image I made quite a few years ago, it should be a man and a woman, half and half, in the circle, connecting heaven and earth. So at this point, we're going to do a guided imagery.
Are we going to do it?
Yeah.
Or should we take questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we would like to have the alpha wave brain. Can we have that upstairs? So again, I'd like you to just sit and put your feet flat on the ground and get in a kind of meditation position. Oh, yeah, great. And I'm going to take you on a little journey into the future. So just imagine that you're in a sunny meadow on a summer day, and that you're sitting next to a stream, and the stream is kind of gurgling, and you can feel that it is alive, it's flowing, it's bringing life to this field. Just take a moment to feel your body in this meadow. And you can feel the sun's rays on your skin. You feel totally present to this meadow, and just imagine what it looks like in your mind. Visualize it. Put yourself in it. Be present to it. At some point, you look around and you realize that there's a path leading through the meadow towards the forest that surrounds this meadow. Get up from your sitting position and just walk at whatever speed you want along the path that's winding its way through the high grass and into the forest. And once you enter the forest, it gets darker, and there's a path, and you follow that path up and down a few small hills. Just feel what it's like to be in this cool, dense, dark forest. And as you're walking through the forest, time is passing. It's 2020, and then it's 2025, and then it's 2030, and then it's 2035. So 17 years have passed. And just imagine that suddenly you begin to see light on the far side of the meadow, and there's a clearing. And as you walk into the clearing, you see in front of you a house. And it's your house in 2035. Just look at it and try to see its details. What color is it? What's it made out of? What kind of emotional response do you get by observing it? Does it mean anything to you? Because it's yours. Is it foreign or is it something familiar? So go to the house, walking through the clearing, and go up to the front door. And when you get to the front door, knock on it and make a statement and say to the house, please, spirit of this house, come and open the door and let me in. So after a few moments, I just want you to imagine the door opening and a spirit is there in front of you. And it might be a being, It might be a person. It might be a spirit of some kind. It might be a color or a feeling or an object. And in your mind, ask that being, where am I? And what is my life like at this particular point? And that spirit may allow you into the house to show you around, and just try to visualize what that main space looks like. And just give yourself a chance to take it in. You notice that there's a stairway that leads up. Go up to the second floor. What does that feel like? Invite the spirit of that higher part of you to come out and communicate with you. What is this being like? And does this being have something to communicate to you? And if it is, give yourself a moment to hear it or to take it in. And it may be a symbol, and it may be words. And once you've done this, go back down the stairway and go out the front door of the house. Shut the door behind you, whatever it looks like. And you notice the opening in the forest that you had come to earlier. You walk back through the dark forest from 2035 to 2030 to 2025 to 2018. And you're back in the meadow. And go back to your little place where you sat beside the stream. And just give yourself a moment to feel what you've been feeling and to think what you've been thinking and to remember what it is you've experienced in this little journey into the future. And when you're ready to come back into the room, please come back and join us at the Rubin Museum in 2018. So, normally when I do a meditation like this, a guided imagery, it's something where you ask people to really offer what they felt, what they experienced. And we're not going to have the time to be able to do that tonight, unfortunately. But, among yourselves, if you come with a partner or a friend or someone you connect with, share with them what you experienced. Because what you were actually living through was something that's very relevant to your core being. And not only that, to your higher wisdom. The second floor of your house is your higher being. And it'll be curious to really see what you felt and who was there. Simply because this is a possible way of receiving a kind of guidance from our own inner being. I've always looked at it as being a very feminine part of our being because it's very visual, it's very sensual and very emotional often.